Hello and welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. My name's Adam, and tonight's presentation is on big images with small telescopes. But before we get into that, first of all, for our YouTube viewers, subscribe to us if you like what you're hearing, or if you want to get into on these interactive sessions, join us on Google Plus, and you can get right in, and you can ask your questions live, whether it be in this room or in Q&A. But the first thing I want to do is I want to show off our image spotlight of the week, and I hope you can see my screen there. It's this beautiful Soul Nebula by Steve Coates, and he is in the room, and he's going to speak for a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about his image. Steve, go right ahead.
All right, thank you, Adam. This is an image of IC 1871, the Soul Nebula, which I took, let's see, back in November of this past year when we had some clear weather. The Soul Nebula is an emission nebula located approximately 7,500 light years from Earth. The telescope that I used to capture this image was an Explorer Scientific apochromatic refractor with a focal length of 952 millimeters. This is a new scope for me. I just bought it this past year, and really enjoy using it. Before I was using an AT8RC. Which, you know, the focal length was a little bit challenging to use on a Losmandy G11 that I use, and with this focal length, it's more appropriate for this mount. The imaging camera that I used was a QSI 683 with a Lodestar guiding camera and an Astrotech field flattener. I used Maxim DL to capture these images. It was stacked in Deep Sky Stacker and processed in Photoshop. Again, the dates, this was imaged over 3 nights in November, excuse me, 4 nights in November, using HA03 and S2. I acquired 5 hours of HA data, 10 subs for 30-minute exposures. In HA, 03 was 6 subs at 30-minute exposures. These I bin 2x2, and same to go with the sulfur. At the end, I went on ahead and added red, green, blue filters, mostly for star colors. So the total integration time was 11 hours for this image. This was imaged from very light polluted skies of Ocala, Florida. My light skies are measure a Bortle scale on 7 to 8, and I have street lights basically no more than 20 yards away from where my telescope pier is. Field of view for this image is about 48.7 by 64.7 arc minutes, and the image scale is 1.17 arc-second pixels using the imaging train above. Again, this was processed in Photoshop. I do use Photoshop still. I have yet to get to PixInsight, but that will be coming up hopefully in the next couple of years. I did this using Hubble Palette, which basically was described very well by Bob Franke on his Focal Point Observatory website. Basically, I used the Hubble palette, assigning the HA to green, 03 to blue, and S2 to red, and using selective color tool adjusted greens, yellows, and cyans to pull out more of a gold and turquoise color. This is probably processed probably about 50 times before I finally got to the final image that I like, and even still there's further images that I have on my website, even after I posted to the Astro Imaging channel. Final touches usually were done. I usually use lab color to increase the saturation without adding noise, and I use a high pass filter to pull out details, and nebula and surface blur to blur out some of the not so smooth areas. Once again, you know, I started using this telescope early this year. I really enjoy using it. I would recommend it to anybody, you know, who's looking for an imaging scale about 900 to 1,000 millimeters. And just want to thank the Astro Imaging channel for showing this image.
Thanks, Steve, for volunteering it, and I want to remind all of our viewers out there, feel free to post your images to the post. I don't think we're going to update them every week because it's going to get a little complicated. We might as well just pick them from a large batch of images. But this was a great one. I shot this earlier this year, and I was surprised at the structure he got in the blues here. over on the left beside the I don't know what to refer to it as, but the cones of it.
Yeah.
The blues look great.
Yeah, thank you. And once again, this is like several iterations of this. And I mean, just to add a little, what I found is, even though once I got the Hubble palette put together and I got my colors put together, I yet still took my HA images and stacked it on top as a luminance level, just once again, just to pull out more luminance. I haven't seen that documented anywhere. It's just something that I just happened across and started doing it with all my past images, just to bring in out more brightness, more luminance.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, just because of my light pollution, that H alpha layer is really clean.
Yeah.
It gives you the detail. Great image. So
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So submit your images to the post, and we'll pick from them each week. If we don't pick your image, we might use it in our presentation. It gives us a lot of stuff to look at, so we're glad to see them. So what I'm going to do right now is move right on to my presentation. And I'm going to have to do this in the right order. Do me a favor, and I know you don't see it yet. You're going to see full screen first. And please stop me if you don't see my presentation or hear my voice or anything like that. But this presentation is on big images with small telescopes. And of course, the first question I was asked was, what is a small telescope? And of course, this is all in my opinion. What's small to one person may not be small to another, but the point that I'm going to make is going to be pretty consistent, and you're going to see what I mean by a small telescope. A small telescope is not an 8-inch SCT, focal length telescopes. In my opinion, an 80 millimeter or smaller refractor is a good example of what a small telescope is. They have shorter focal lengths, and almost more important is the weight with the camera could be under 10 pounds. That's a third of the capacity of the budget level mounts. Fits into carry-on luggage. 80 millimeters or below is about the point where APOs are affordable. Not that you have to buy an APO. There's some great doublets out there that just give great performance with a field flattener. But there are also some great APOs out there that are extremely affordable, have flat fields, and are intended for DSLR photography or even CCD photography. A small telescope is kind of AVX or ZEQ 25 class capable. Not that I'm advocating those mounts necessarily, but the point is you can get away with them with the common starting astrophotography mounts. You don't need to spend $5,000 on your mount, $3,000 on your mount, which an SCT or an RC may require. Can you do it on a budget mount? Yes, you can, but you're going to have lots of headaches. Now, before I start, this is kind of addressing a lot of the people who come in to astrophotography and think big telescope is better. And in many cases with visual, bigger telescopes are better. Everyone wants a big telescope. There's nothing wrong with you for wanting a big telescope. If you buy a small refractor, you're still going to want a bigger telescope. But there are a lot of things you're going to need to know before you're successfully imaging with that large telescope. You'll need to know how to polar align. You'll need to know how to take calibration frames. You'll need to know the basics of your acquisition routine. You'll need to know how to focus and how often. You'll need to know the capabilities and the limitations of your mount. You'll need to know what to do with all the data after you get it. If you start with a large telescope, you may not have any images to show for it as you're learning these things. If you start with a wide field refractor, you will. You'll actually have a catalog of nice images that you will have learned all of these things. A lot of things have to go right, and when something doesn't go right, it stops all of the later steps. And that's why it's so important to take small chunks of astrophotography and accomplish them slowly, rather than jumping into it with both feet. If you have unlimited money, you could probably jump in with both feet and do pretty well, but you still have to learn all this stuff, and you're not going to be doing it immediately.
So, what do you think is the most important thing when you start?
The most
Which,
important
yeah, the most important.
um, the most important thing when you start, in my opinion, is I'm going to say you have to understand a lot of this stuff. Like
Yeah.
anything else, the more reading and the more investigation of what you're looking at, the better you're going to do. Um, what I think you'll discover is the most important thing is going to be matching your telescope to your mount, not matching your telescope to your pixel size or anything like that. Matching your telescope to your mount. You're going to have to take some pixel size into that, and I'm gonna go into that in a little bit. But what you're going to hear me say again is your mount's going to determine what you can put on it and what the capabilities of the telescope you put on it are going to be.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think that would be the primary thing, is matching your telescope to the mount. And I think I'll take your question. I'll answer it through the entire presentation as we go.
Okay. Um, Amount, real most important, and in the telescope on its own. What do you think? Yeah, just for we're talking about small telescope. What do you think?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the initial part of the question. I heard mount and the telescope, but
Yeah, okay, and the mount most important, but the telescope himself. What do you think?
how important is the telescope itself?
Yeah, yeah, itself.
Um, you know, you can take nice images. It kind of depends. Are you saying, can you take nice images with a telescope that's barely workable? No. But if the focuser is up to snuff, and if it's a doublet, it's good enough. I mean, you can spend $300-400 and get a good telescope with a DSLR. You might have to spend another 150 to get the field flattener. Um, but they're putting out some pretty good bargain telescopes, especially if you're willing to go down to 66 millimeters or 71 millimeters. Um, so I think do I the other thing is, what's going to bother you about your images? If you see a perfectly flat field, do you need that perfectly flat field across the entire image? Um, if you're using a DSLR, uh, are you willing to put up with a little bit of vignetting, or do you want to have that perfect flat field? Are you going to be paying attention to the spot diagrams? Are you going to be going that far? And do you need a premium refractor to keep you happy? But the bargain refractors are going to be great for a lot of people starting out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so moving on. Nobody wants a large mount. And that's the one thing coming into astrophotography that people don't realize, is the mount is so important. But nobody really wants a large mount. It's kind of an afterthought. And the problem with that is that large telescopes require large mounts. Mounts are heavy and they require tripods. So you've got all this additional gear you're lugging around. In addition to that, good mounts are expensive. You can't just buy the cheapest mount out there and get by with it. You can't just buy the cheapest large mount out there and get by with it. You need to buy a large, good mount. Premium mounts are very expensive. They say with premium mounts, a good mount disappears and just works. How's that for a selling point? Your mount just disappears. So you've spent all this money for something that's going to disappear on you. It'd be hard to sell Ferraris if they were going to disappear on you. But you know what? That's what we like in astrophotography, something that just works. It gives you round stars and you forget about it. And that's what you don't anticipate coming into astrophotography. The mount, and I said this earlier, the mount determines your capacity and your tracking capability. Your capacity is how much you can put on the mount, what size telescope you can put on the mount. And when I say capacity, it's kind of a balance between the size and the focal length. If it could be perfectly lightweight, you could get away with a little bit longer of a focal length. But if it's heavy, then you kind of have to back off the focal length. And the tracking capability. How tight are your stars going to be? If your optics are perfect, how round, how perfectly pinpoint is it going to keep your stars? it's got to do it beyond seeing, right? Or it's got to do it just as well as seeing. You don't want to be limited by your mount. So that's why the mount is so important. On top of that, you're going to be guiding. And I don't have a particular slide for this, but we do a lot of things to keep our stars round. You're going to spend a lot of money just buying little adapters to make your stars round. First, it's guiding to make your stars round throughout the field. Then it's little adapters to make your stars round in the very, very edges. We do a lot of stuff to keep our stars round, but right at the beginning, if your stars aren't round, you're not going anywhere. You're not going to be able to stack your images. You might be able to get away with manual stacking, but keep in mind, if your stars aren't round, they're drifting, you're smudging your image. You're going to be chasing this issue. This is going to be a big issue. Well, you know, with small refractors, it's a lot easier to keep round stars. With SCTs, with RCs, with large refractors, with big, heavy telescopes, it's harder. It's a lot harder. And it's not something you want to be dealing with when you're starting out. You need small, digestible pieces of astrophotography so you can get somewhere. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're going to discover issues you have. You're going to discover things, but don't give yourself issues right off the bat. So, okay, I'm not saying that you have to buy a small telescope. You have to take poor quality images. Widefield images are pretty amazing. This is a widefield image with a 71 millimeter refractor that I took, and the nebula fills the screen. I mean, I'm pretty happy with this. Is this any less impressive than a long focal length image? This is the same target that I took with my SCT, and I don't know, is it any less impressive? I zoomed in on one particular spot. You should kind of ignore the color treatment because I did that. The color here I kind of chose, whereas this one I tried to give it a more natural treatment, the red nebula, as you're more accustomed to seeing it. But I don't see this widefield imaging as being any less impressive or anything any less beautiful than this image. I will say the widefield image I took in 5 hours, and this image here took me 2.5 days. So for me, that's almost a month of imaging. The widefield I got in 5 hours, I got clouded out halfway through. I still got a great image out of it. So the effort that goes into these longer focal length images is considerable. It's not so much because you want to get the great image as much as it is the focal length of the wide field scopes tend to be faster. And that's what you'll see here. Why a small refractor? First, you heard me say, they're not taxing on the mount. Lightweight and portable. Collimation isn't a concern. In most cases, collimation with refractors, it's a non-issue. When you get into the really fast ones, occasionally you have some issues that are kind of like collimation, but with RCs, with SCTs, you could have collimation issues. With even 6-inch newts, collimation could be an issue. These small refractors, they're easier to guide. They tend to be faster, as I just said, and I like fast imaging. Faster telescopes cut through everything better, whether it's light pollution or signal or whatever. They do a great job, and they're reasonably priced. So on the bottom left here, you see the Astrotech 65 EDQ, I believe it is. This is a great DSLR telescope, and I say DSLR telescope. You could use a CCD on it, but you have to be careful because of the shorter focal length requirements of it, or excuse me, the shorter back focus requirements of it. It's optimized for the perfect length of a DSLR and a T-ring, I believe. On the right, bottom right here, you see the Wostar 71, and I just picked this up, and I'm really loving it. I'm really enjoying it. A little bit longer back focus, which is great for CCD imaging. A little bit more generous. And up top there, you see the TAC FSQ 85. So this is an 85 millimeter refractor. Probably not because it's any longer focal length. It's actually a faster refractor, especially much faster when you put the focal reducer on there. But I'm not saying you have to buy a cheap refractor. If you want an expensive telescope, buy the TAC. If that's how you satisfy yourself, it's a great purchase that well beyond the other what these budget refractors are. but great performance. So you can see people spend money on wide field refractors. It's not like an afterthought in imaging. That's one thing that you kind of have to get beyond. But I'm going to keep going on because lenses work extremely well too. And lenses, I mean, hey, they work with DSLRs. They click right into DSLRs. So they're really going to work well for you if you're using a DSLR camera. When I say lenses, prime lenses are typically sharper. We mostly use prime lenses, although they've been doing great jobs with Canon zoom lenses, or I should say zoom lenses across the board. The prime lenses tend to be sharper and be a little bit faster. That said, you typically need to stop a lens down for the best sharpness. An f2.8 lens, you're going to be shooting at f4 usually at least. The two lenses I have at the bottom here, the Nikkor 180mm AIS, which Jerry Rodriguez is an advocate of, and you can read a ton about it at on his website. Unfortunately, I've tried to pick up a bunch of these on eBay, and the price seems to be rising on these, not falling. Bottom left is the Canon 200mm f2.8, which is another great lens. Okay, so lenses are lightweight, so you're not worrying about the weight of lenses. They have a built-in focuser. Think about that. That's kind of cool. Getting back to the lightweight, I do want to point out one thing. You might need to use a lens collar on some of these. Even though they're lightweight, they are a little bit bigger. But lens collars are available, or you could put rings on it if you have them available. Where there's a will, there's a way. You might get some flexure if you don't. Tips for lenses, and I already said it, use primes because they're sharp. Step them down until sharp. I already said that. This is a tip that Scott Rosen actually gave me earlier. Step down rings eliminate spikes. And I don't know if you've seen it, but on really, really good lenses, they have lots of small diffraction spikes. And that's due to the number of in the diaphragm, the number of spikes in the diaphragm, so to speak, or the number of I don't know, blades in the diaphragm. Thank you. If that's Sean, I think that was Sean. Yeah. So when you're looking at terrestrial photography, if you see the bokeh effect, just beautiful blurred background, all those blades create that beautiful blurred background. When you're using a fast telescope on stars, it creates spikes. Step-down rings can get rid of them. Some people like them, some people hate them. I thought that was really cool that you can get rid of them if you don't like them, just by using a step-down ring. But something I never know. Tripod collar or rings may be required, so you're going to be spending a little bit more money, so be careful. Focus aids, Bahtinov mask or laptop. It is very difficult to focus a lens. They make great images, but it's difficult to focus them. Keep that in mind when you're going out. Try it in your backyard before you go out to dark skies once or twice. And good focus may not be good. Jerry Rodriguez's site has a good thing on the Nikkor 180mm. If you Google that, you'll get there. And he points out that because of the chromatic aberration of the lenses, it's better not to focus when the stars are tighter. And that's something to read up on if you are using the Nikkor or a lens that does show chromatic aberration. I'm not going to go into it now because it's actually a couple pages long, but very, very interesting. One thing, I always love this. Somebody says, I want a big telescope because I want to take an image of a galaxy. And then they show me Andromeda Galaxy. And they say, like this. And Andromeda is a large galaxy. This is actually Adam Bloch's APOD image from years ago, 2008. And I remember seeing this years ago, and it convinced me. I was kind of amazed. But it shows you that Andromeda is actually, I think they say 7 moons across. So Andromeda is a very large target. Many objects in the sky are very large. And by buying a small refractor, it doesn't mean that you cannot fill the entire field of view with an object. So that's one thing that you have to keep in mind. You're not compromising that. You may be limited to the number of targets that can fill the field of view, but you're learning here. Eventually you can buy a larger telescope. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get these smaller telescopes and get the best images out that you possibly can. I want to go into sensor size and field of view quickly. We've done this before, but keep a few things in mind. DSLRs have large sensors. CCDs come in all sizes. If you're spending $5,000 to $10,000, you've got a large sensor, which is probably bigger than a DSLR sensor. If you're spending under that, it's probably smaller than a DSLR sensor. In general, the Sony sensors tend to be small. This is in regards to CCDs. And the TrueSense, Kodak, On Semiconductor, or whatever they call themselves now, tend to be larger. And that directly relates to focal length, or I should say, you take that with focal length, which lenses can be in the 8mm to 400mm range. They get larger than that, but they're Canons after that. And small refractors, in my estimation, of course, will be under 500mm. So when you take the combination of the focal length of the telescope you're choosing and the sensor size of the CCD that you're using, you get some interesting things happen. I just want to stop for 1 second and ask if there are any questions up till now. If there aren't, I can continue on. Doesn't sound like there are any questions. So David volunteered his image to me earlier of the cocoon, or excuse me, of the crescent, and we were talking about it, and he said, oh, well, he's surprised by the field of view that his 90mm provides with his attic camera. And I saw his image at first. I said, wow, I'm surprised by the field of view that his 90mm camera, 90mm shows with his attic. And over on the left here is the photograph that I took of this object with my large telescope, an 8-inch SCT with the CAF 8300. So I say big scope, medium to large sensor. His telescope, I say medium scope, small sensor. I think his sensor is 11mm across, and mine's maybe 22mm across. So you can see how if you're using a smaller sensor, it impacts what field of view you're using. Sensor tech is getting better. Sensor technology is getting better, and with the smaller Sony sensors, smaller telescopes are more attractive. You can get more out of them. You might not get the same resolution as using a bigger telescope, but you don't need to blow up these objects so much that you can't see the outside of them. You want to see the whole object and maybe some of the background area. So this just goes to show you how sensor size can affect that. And next, look at this, same object, small telescope with the DSLR. And you can see, okay, so it doesn't have the same zoomed in field of view, but there's a lot of extended nebula there. There's some dark nebula in the bottom right. And this is an old image of mine, so this isn't a great image, but it gives you an idea of what you can see when you step back. With small refractors, the important thing is selecting the right targets. And if you want galaxies, M31, M33, Markarian's chain, groups of galaxies, M81 and M82. For nebulae, and these are just off the top of my head, but there are many, many more. I see 405 and 410, the ones that you saw earlier that I showed. I probably didn't even mention what they were. Orion Nebula, Horsehead Nebula, Rosette Nebula, Heart and Soul Nebula, lots of them out there. There are open clusters, there are comets, there's dark dusk, there's IFN, the Integrated Flux Nebula, or any combination of all of those. Keep in mind, you're taking a wide view of everything. You really can fit whatever it is you want into the field of view. But framing is everything. Whether it's large galaxies or multiple targets. You can see the Pac-Man and Comet here. I believe it was Hartley, Comet Hartley 2, that I took a while back. Extended nebula. This is that same crescent nebula, but I turned it into a mosaic going towards solder. And just by taking a step back, wow, there's a lot of great stuff up there. Think about how large that is. That nebula extends well beyond the field of view of my DSLR, and this is my William Optic 66. I could have taken a 20-panel mosaic of that. That'd be great. There are also very large targets, and it takes a great imager to get this one. But Rogelio Bernal Andreo, who I use a few of his images on the channel here because they're just so great, took this of CMS 147 supernova remnant, and this is a massive target. This takes about 2 to 3 frames for me to mosaic it with my wide field scope. So there are some very large targets out there, and you don't think about them. Other techniques that I think are conducive to wide field imaging or other techniques to use are longer exposures. While you're learning, you should be pushing your exposures up higher and higher and higher. How do you do that? I don't necessarily mean with the DSLR dropping the ISO, although you can do that with the DSLR. But what I do mean is you may be buying filters. I saved you some money because you're not buying that big telescope. You're buying a small telescope. So I don't mind spending some of your money right now. You can buy light pollution suppression filters, and if you're getting 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute exposures out of your light polluted backyard, you can push them up a little bit longer. You can also do narrowband filters. With the DSLR, H-alpha filters are pretty good. If you're using a CCD or getting into CCDs, any of the narrowband filters will be good. H-alpha being the primary, O3 and S2 coming after that. And then you're going to be pushing your exposures up to 20, 30 minutes. And you are going to be exposing a lot of that extended nebula, more than you saw in my images here. I haven't really been pushing to get the extended nebula so much, although I shouldn't say that I do in every one of my images. But by using specific combinations, I take those narrowband filters and combine them with RGB, or just do narrowband treatment and show off that extended nebula. DSLR modification is important. I saved you that money. You might be spending it on a DSLR mod, infrared mod, so you can see the H-alpha. You might know about it. If not, look it up if you're coming to this as a newbie, because that's one of the things you have to anticipate. The reason I'm giving you all this information is so you can anticipate some of the things you may be spending your money on. One of the best things you can do, though, is drive to darker skies. I hate driving to darker skies because I always come back depressed. I always come back depressed because now I have to shoot from my light polluted backyard. That's how good my images are from darker skies. I come back not wanting to shoot from my light polluted backyard. But you get great images. I've said it before, you could set up your telescope, shoot for 8 hours, or you could drive an hour out, shoot for 2 hours, drive back, and you'll have a better image. It's just the way it works. Processing. The better you get at processing, the better you're going to be. If you use these techniques, processing is your limit. I'm surprised at how much you can do with good data. You really can do anything with it. And the real beauty of Widefield, I'm just going to show off some great images. This is Scott Rosen's Horsehead and Orion. Did you know they were that close? I've seen this image. I think this is Sean's dream image or dream framing. He would retire when he could take an image like this until he did. Well, this is Scott Rosen, so maybe not exactly like this, but this is a great image. 200 millimeters. So this is the focal length I'm advocating with lenses. And as I was browsing around his site, I saw another image of his. And this is the Rho complex. Look at this, 50 millimeter lens. This is an unbelievable image, and this is a 50 millimeter lens. This is a little lens that's sitting on the end of a DSLR camera. Coming into astro imaging, I had no idea. You showed me this, I would think, oh, this is really deep inside of something. What a great image. When you start doing this stuff, you just start thinking to yourself, wow, I got this great frame, but what's off on the left side? How far does it go? And you start using all your programs or looking at past images or doing whatever you can, and you see there are interesting objects all around. Bottom right here is IC 405 and 410. And then I believe the cluster is it's either M36 or M38, and the cluster on the bottom left might be M32. But there are a lot of objects in here. I started loving this constellation after I started imaging it, and that's the end of my presentation. And I'm just going to check my time. Perfect, because I am going to demonstrate how to do a quick mosaic in PixInsight, because Everyone says PixInsight is difficult, including myself, but this is one of the things that actually isn't so difficult, and it does fairly well. Sorry, I'm just clicking a few things. Can you guys see my PixInsight screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
So I posted this. I posted this mosaic on AstroBin, so you could probably see it if you want to go see the final results, and I'll work my way through it as I go. But for creating mosaics in PixInsight, you're basically just using two tools. You're using the star alignment tool, which you're probably familiar with, or if you're not, I'll get you familiar with it. And you're using gradient merge mosaic, which is incredibly good at what it does. The star alignment tool is the first tool, and you find it over in the usual spot. And there are just a few options here. Let me reset it so that I can show you where we start out. It asks you for a reference image, and for my reference image, I'm going to pick my bottom right image, which hopefully is labeled as bottom right, and I don't get it confused with the others. It's bottom right. And so you select your reference frame in there. So of course I've selected my bottom right. You have a few options in here. I've never really had to touch those options. I have touched those options when I was troubleshooting other stuff, and it never fixed what I was doing. But you want to play around, you can definitely check them out. The working mode that we're going to start in, we go through a couple working modes. So remember this. The working mode that we're going to start in is Register Union Mosaic. So we click that, Register Union Mosaic, and the other thing we're going to check is Frame Adaptation. Frame Adaptation basically does a linear fit on the two frames so that they match up together, so that one's not brighter than the other, and it just makes it work. Otherwise, you'll see the frames not look good together. It'll be pretty obvious. So I've selected my reference frame. It's this frame right here. I've got this top frame up here that I want to merge with this. You have to go through it and do them one at a time. So I'm going to take this triangle and I'm going to drag it up here. When I do these things, occasionally my audio cuts out, so I'm just, if it does, it does. PixInsight doesn't take so long to do this. We will see about how long it takes to do that. I'd say about 25-30 seconds, but we will see. Maybe not quite that long. So you can see, here we go. It has generated this frame. So I'm going to put a quick STF on it, and you can see. So it's merged those two frames. Now, we're not done yet. If you go close, you may or may not notice a line going through. I actually don't see a line going through. There should be a line going through there. I'm sure there is. But whatever. It worked better than I was expecting. So I have created this panel, which is my right panel, and it's labeled Top Right Mosaic. It's just the way their naming convention goes. So I would pick that Top Right Mosaic, click OK. This is my new reference frame. I just selected it as a reference frame. Using the same working mode, the same frame adaptation, I'm going to drag the triangle over to this image. And what's going to happen is it's going to give me a new image that's going to have that image merged into here. I'm going to select that new image as my reference frame, and I'm going to do the last one. When I finish with that, when I finish with that, I'm going to have a frame that looks like this. And you can see this is the same. I just did the same exact thing. I have a really clean seam right there, but this frame didn't come in so well. Little bit of gradient right there. This gradient merge mosaic tool will take care of some of that, but what I didn't mention earlier is it's good to do a DBE on all of this. Get your backgrounds really clean. You may have to do some investigation, find out if it is actually nebula there or if it's just brightness. In this case, this was the moon. But what happens is you've assembled this mosaic. I call it the seamed mosaic because it has seams. The next thing you're going to do, you're going to use this mosaic as your reference image. So it's light filter H alpha binning 11 mosaic. Okay, so that is my reference image right there. If you want to speed up the process, you can create, okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-register this image to my final mosaic. What I want to do is I want to create an image where I have black on all sides except for this particular area. What I want to do is I want to create this image right here. So when I select, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to select Register Match Images. And when I do the same thing, so when I take as the reference image this and I drag the triangle onto this, it's going to take a little bit of time again. This may fail for me, and I kind of hope it does fail for me because there'd be something I'd like to show you. I'm detecting the stars right now. It's crazy how well it does this. No, it looks like it's going to do it. It's not failing. If it does fail to find it, you can use a preview box around where the intersection is supposed to be, and it'll do it a lot quicker. And you can see here, it's given me that image. I have to do that individually using the same reference frame to each image. Then I save it off. I want to save 4 images, one with the bottom right quadrant, one with the top right, one with the top left, one with the bottom left. Save them all into a separate directory so they're nice and clean, and then I open them back up on the desktop and clean them up and make them look like that, and grab my gradient, and then I open Gradient Merge Mosaic. Were there any questions about the earlier process? Because that's pretty much step 1, using star alignment, working your way through iteratively for each image, using first register union mosaic and then register match images. If there weren't any questions. When you get to this area, very few options, and maybe that's why I think it works so well, because they don't give you many options and it does work well. The defaults in this, the default parameter is average, and you can use average and you'll probably get good results. If you've got a really clean image to begin with, average might be better. If you have a noisy image, occasionally what happens is you notice the averaging, so you notice the improvement in the signal-to-noise ratio in the overlapping frames. So it's better to use overlay in many, many cases, and I don't know why they don't leave overlay as default. And the feather radius is usually 10 as default, but everyone seems to bump it up to 15, and it seems to work better when I do bump it up to 15. So these are my favorite settings to use, and they frequently work when I use them. So if I were to click global, oops, I click global. I was planning on not clicking global because it was going to take a long time, and I accidentally clicked it. And Gradient Merge Mosaic does not let you back out of it. So you guys are going to see the real deal here. I'd say Gradient Merge Mosaic on 4 frames is going to take about 2 minutes. It really works well. Maybe not 2 minutes. This is the last step. I think this is the last step. It really works well across a broad range of images. And what I will say is with RGB images, it's important to get your color calibration correct early on. before you use gradient merge mosaic. Gradient merge mosaic is done while still linear, so it's pretty much your step immediately after DBE color calibration, or DBE background neutralization color calibration, then you're using gradient merge mosaic. So I'm waiting here. We're on the last step. This last step takes a little bit of time for PixInsight to work through, but it is going to spit out an image for me any second now. And there we go. And I'm going to put an STF on it, and there you can see gave me a nice image. And as I zoom in, this is pretty much the center of the image, and you're not seeing any lines at all. I had noticed from previous attempt that something shows up right there, and I don't know if you can see it there, but I could go through and work that. You can change the feather radius to work on that. I think what the best way to do that is probably to go back to that initial frame and do a better DBE on that frame, because when we go up here to the top, you'll see some unnatural, what looks like nebula, but it's actually just illumination. I shot this frame when the moon was coming up. I remember it, and that was the ramification of it. But gradient merge mosaic, great tool in PI, fairly simple. That didn't seem so difficult. So, of course, anything can go wrong, and we can help you out with other things. Something to mention, one thing that frequently goes wrong is if there's a bright star sitting on the edge, you can get an odd look. I don't see any right here, but you can get an odd darkening around it. And solution to that is actually you can kill or cut out the star before you do the process, and it'll still find the matches around it, and it'll just ignore that star. I think you do it in one frame, or you can dim it in some ways, but there are ways to do it, and that's a frequent thing that comes up. But that's basically gradient merge mosaic. So 10:17, I didn't go that long, but that is pretty much the gist of the presentation. So I'm going to check and see if there's anything in Q&A or anything like that. Okay.
Adam, I have a link to that YouTube link. Do you want it?
A link to what's that?
That whole process.
Oh, gradient merge mosaic. Yeah, throw it into chat. Is that whose YouTube link is that? Is that the 12 panel?
Yeah, that's Steve Allen's.
Yeah, that's a good one, definitely. Yeah, Steve Allen, that's where basically I learned this process, was Steve Allen's tutorial that's on YouTube as well. Just Google that, gradient merge mosaic will get you there too. It's a great process. He did 16 frames, which made it a lot more difficult. The frames start to get really hard to deal with. Mine is only 6,600 pixels across, but I know Hytham had been doing a much larger one, and that got very, very difficult, and he ended up upgrading his computer to get it fixed, to get it processed, and that's how I feel sometimes when I'm waiting for PixInsight to run through. Larry, sum up the major differences between the two methods I used in regards to star alignment. Yes, star alignment. Yes. Hold on, PixInsight has to be open. Yeah, wrong one. Stop me if you can't. Just scream out if you can't see my PixInsight screen. Okay, so there are these working modes, and stop me if this isn't what you're talking about. Working modes, register match images. So typically when you're doing your basic star alignment, you're going to use register match images, and I mean basically that does what it is. It automatically detects the stars and lines them up one on top of each other. each image gets lined up. I kind of cheated it with the method that I did, but it had the same effect. And I'm a little confused about one of these, so I know a lot of us are confused on the PI board about this particular step, but I know it's the wrong way to do it, so I shouldn't even go into that much. But register union mosaic, what that does is that registers and combines them when they're of different scales, of different fields. There has to be some overlap, but given a small amount of overlap, that will mosaic, that will put together the two fields. Register union separate does the same thing as register union mosaic, but instead of giving you the two fields, it splits it into two images and gives you black boxes where the alternate's supposed to be. So let me give you an example of that. Let me take the bottom right here. In fact, if you're doing only a two-panel mosaic, you don't have to get into this two-step process. This will actually be enough for a two-panel mosaic. It gives you some issues when you go larger than two panels, but this will be enough for a two-panel mosaic. Obviously, this being the first step, gradient merge mosaic being the second step. But having the bottom right as my reference and going over to the top right, it's going to detect the stars, match them up. And there we go. So by using register union separate, it gives me two images, kind of like what I wanted out of the results of the other process. This is primed and ready to go for gradient merge mosaic. Because I did the 4 images earlier, I had to create a full reference image, otherwise my stars wouldn't align properly. So that's kind of the distinction between the three of them, and those are going to be what you're using for basic star alignment. I think the other modes are basically if you're troubleshooting stuff. If stuff isn't working for you, then you might move into the other modes. But that's basically it.
Okay, so I guess so in other words, the star alignment, you use that to register the stars to kind of get them all lined up, and then the merge process is when you actually merge the panels together. Then, correct?
Oh yes, and then gradient merge mosaic, yeah. So if I were to just pull gradient merge mosaic, actually the files have to be saved. If I were to save these off and use gradient merge mosaic, and then run it, it'd merge these files perfectly. Star alignment is what you do to create the files that you give to gradient merge mosaic.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Yes, Tommy, these were luminance only, only because I don't have the full RGB of the 4 panels. I hope to have that soon. I have, let's see. Not quite ready for final presentation. Hopefully you can see it because it's in Photoshop, but that's the RGB frames. This is H-alpha RGB, so I use the H-alpha frames to accent this. And actually you can see the narrowband frames aligned really well. The stars in my RGB frames were a little bit larger. I don't know if that was due to conditions, but it's an issue I've had previously and caused me some issues. So I actually find merging mosaics with RGB a little bit more difficult, but it still does it well. You can merge them. You'd never know unless you pointed it out, but I think the condition changes can really impact it considerably. And I saw a bunch of stuff over in Q&A that I want to try and get to. Might just be chatting. Yeah, chatting about nice lenses. So that's what we do. Does anybody have any other questions? Anything to add?
I have a quick question. I apologize for bringing this up. And I don't want to. Hope I don't cause any consternation, but I'm at the point in my astro imaging where I've got to decide what to use for processing. You know, PixInsight or Photoshop, and I've got them all. And I mean, I don't know. What is the consensus here of this group? I see you guys using PixInsight a lot. Or use a combination of both software packages? I mean, what's the latest and the greatest thought on that?
I personally I use a combination of PixInsight and Photoshop, and the more I use PixInsight, the less I use Photoshop. I use Photoshop for lots of stuff, like at work and in the real world, but every time I commit to learning a full PixInsight feature and learning it through and kind of learning everything it does, it seems to do a better job than Photoshop does. I've noticed that a number of times as I've learned stuff through PixInsight. Started with just image stacking and calibration. It did a much better job than Deep Sky Stacker did, and then with noise reduction when applied at the right place, it did a much better job. So that's kind of been what I've been noticing. So I'm getting more and more comfortable with it. It's big, overwhelming, and intimidating, but it works well.
Okay, yeah, because I got to make a decision on what to do. I mean, in other words, you know, just bail out on Photoshop because I'm just starting to get into that, and maybe it's time to just dedicate PixInsight and go from there. Thanks, Adam.
I think you're going to dedicate. Go ahead, Alex.
Over in Q&As, I think there's some questions over in Q&As that haven't been coming in.
Michael Newman, I'm looking for your question.
In particular,
what is a prime lens compared to a non-prime?
Yeah, that's answered a little bit later, but go ahead and answer it for everybody.
Yeah, prime lens. Basically, a prime lens is a fixed focal length lens. You can't zoom it in or out. A zoom lens is going to have multiple focal lengths along a range. It's a lot more difficult to build a zoom lens to operate well across that long range, so they compromise every step of the way. With prime lenses, it's optimized at that range, and they can build it better. Was there another question, Alex? Because
there's another.
I see someone say, "Can you see my question?" But
Newman's question about if I could start out with a real premium mount like the MyT or the AP Mach something Mach 1, I suppose, how much easier will astroimaging be able to learn versus spending a lot of time getting the mount to track well, polar aligning, etc. I've seen a lot, and then he goes from there. But basically, what's your take on that, Adam?
This is one of those cases where I hate spending people's money. You can jump right in and buy a premium mount, and I don't know if you're coming into this with no experience. Is it easier to jump right in and buy all premium gear? It's going to be easier because you're going to be learning one thing, and you can kind of rule out certain issues. That's the one nice thing about buying a premium mount is you can basically rule out a lot of mount issues. That said, this hobby is a money pit, and if you start getting to the point where you're throwing money at every issue that pops up, I don't know, is it the same hobby or is it just a never-ending money pit? So it's like saying, does a newbie have to come in and buy a premium everything? No. Does a billionaire have to come in and buy a premium everything? Well, maybe he should, but I hate spending your money. So if you're a billionaire, yeah, buy it all. If it hurts to spend that much, then you could probably spend your money carefully. I always think, what's going to improve my images the most for the least amount of money I spend? So I'm going to come at it that way. That said, you buy a MIT or a Mach 1, your mount's not going to be your limitation. And you should always spend a considerable portion on your mount. That said, this conversation was about wide field refractors, so you do not at all need a MIT or a Mach 1 to run a wide field refractor. You use those to run SCTs or RCs. That's why you buy those telescopes. Hope that answered the question. Oh, that just disappeared on me. I saw another question.
Yeah, I'd have to go along with that. I would say categorically that a premium quality mount does make it easier, but particularly when you're talking about the focal lengths that Adam was talking about tonight, no, it's not necessary. You can Adam had a couple of slides on what kind of mounts you can use. You don't have as much weight, you don't have as much focal length, and weight and focal length both add to the requirement that you have a very good mount. On the other hand, if you're fighting bad cabling issues, bad connectors, periodic errors and stuff like that, yeah, it's nice to get rid of that kind of stuff. But again, what's money worth to you? Eventually, if you're really going to do things in this hobby, you need a premium mount. And if you don't want to step up to a premium mount, go ahead and buy one now. It's not like after you've finished with it for 6 months and decide, this is really a stupid waste of time and effort, you can't sell it back to somebody else. But you're going to lose a few thousand or 1,000 on it, something like that. But, like I said, what's money worth to you?
And one other thing is a lot of the beginners coming in don't know the questions to ask, and they might buy a premium mount and they've spent their last $6,000 on it, and then they say, what's a saddle? And those are those things you learn. So if you know why you're buying a premium mount, then maybe you should be buying a premium mount. If you don't quite know why you're buying a premium mount, then maybe you shouldn't be buying one. I see Tommy has a question. Suggestions on exposure times for DSLR subframes that work for the wide field shots. Longer for fainter areas and shorter for denser areas, always keeping your exposures unsaturated. Well, I will say yes to always keeping your exposures, prevent your exposures from oversaturating, particularly in the stars. I can't really say an exposure time because we're pretty much basing it off the histogram. You want to get your histogram separated from the left. Rule of thumb is 1/3 of the way. You can push it farther. You can probably do some HDR style stuff if you really want to. As you get better at processing, if you really want to push some of the dimmer stuff, you can do longer exposures and blend them in with shorter exposures. But the reason I'm not giving you an exposure time is because it depends a little bit on what focal ratio you're shooting at. But I will say this, 10, 15, 20 minutes isn't unheard of with a DSLR. And I think with the better DSLRs, we're able to push it a little bit farther. But it is that dim stuff that you want to reveal. So you're going to be using filters to do that probably, unless you're in really dark skies, likely narrowband filters. I used a narrowband filter with my DSLR and worked pretty well for getting the stuff out. Not nearly as well as a monochromatic CCD, but that's another discussion. So hope that answered the question.
I think another way of answering that is that, look, every individual frame of your mosaic should be properly exposed. So whatever you're using to expose it were it not being used in a mosaic, all those things that Adam said, you'd want to continue to use it. You got to have good exposures. You also have to watch out if you're taking a set of subframes that are going to be used throughout an evening, and you've got a moon showing or some source of light pollution showing, you may be getting some pretty weird gradients before you, from your gradients may be coming from different places as you go along there, and that could get pretty weird when you start putting them together. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of processing of those mosaics before the sub-exposures of the mosaics before you put them together.
I see Dylan's asking a question on an opinion between Hyperstar or a wide field refractor, and it's hard to say. I will say this: the benefits of a wide field refractor are that it's lighter weight. So if you already have the SCT and you already have a mount that can handle it, then Hyperstar is probably a lot more attractive. I'm not being able to speak from personal experience. All I can say is I see a lot of great Hyperstar images, but to me it doesn't seem like as simple of a system as a wide field refractor. If I had to find a guy off the street and hand him a telescope and have him imaging by that evening, I wouldn't hand him Hyperstar. I'd hand him a wide field refractor. If you think you can figure it out and get it all working, of course it's 8 inches of aperture and f2, and the images are great. I mean, everyone's seen Hyperstar images. They're unbelievable, even with short exposures. But a wide field refractor, it's just a smaller, tighter, easier package. At the same time, Hyperstar is what, $800 or so. You're limited in the cameras. You have to reconfigure it, take the mirror off. So there's some other disadvantages. A lot of pros and cons to weigh in. I don't think I can give you a good yes or no. Just an opinion.
You know, one of the things I noticed about your presentation was that there may be some confusion among people who may be seeing some of this stuff for the first time. Your topic was about taking pictures with small refractors, but with small telescopes. And then when you went to the mosaic section, that's actually may not be where you need the two things don't fit together there, because you can take very wide fields with smaller telescopes. Smaller telescopes tend to have much wider fields. So many of the wide fields that you were seeing in the examples there were not mosaics at all. And then later on we went into making mosaics, where we took pictures that could have come from long focal length telescopes or short focal length telescopes, and still could be put together into mosaics. So if you're looking at this for the first time and think that the pictures that we were seeing have to be mosaicked, no. As a matter of fact, using the shorter focal length, smaller telescopes get you the wider field automatically.
Yeah, I probably didn't elaborate on the point enough, but you take these wide field shots and you see something in the corner of it, something of interest, and that's why you want to go wider. And it may happen in long focal lengths, but the speed of wide field telescopes really picks up the dim stuff well. So you're really, I don't know, there's something about it that really attracts you to it. And I'll tell you, these guys, Rogelio and Scott, I'm sure they've all done long focal length work, but their wide field stuff is just amazing, and they specialize in it for those reasons. It's just unbelievable.
Can I throw in here that Rogelio, I've talked to him about doing a presentation for us at Nightfall next year. So if anybody wants to spend the weekend with Rogelio and 5 or 6 hours sitting in a room with him as he explains how he does that stuff, come on out to Nightfall next year. It's a wonderful star party. If it gets nice and cold like you guys are always complaining about, it's in early November, generally speaking. I forget what the exact dates are. But we're at a resort with 2 pools, a couple of spas, a bar, showers for all you guys. You don't usually get that at a star party. And Rogelio will be there. So that'll be a nice time.
Showers at a star party. Huh, that's crazy. All right, well, I don't know if anyone else has anything, any other topics they wanted to bring up. I can't really think of much, so if there aren't any, I'm going to thank our YouTube viewers for coming. Remember, subscribe to us, or if you want to get in the conversation, follow us on Google+, and you'll get an invitation to all of our live presentations. So for now, thanks for coming, and we'll be back next week. I don't know what the topic is yet, but keep your eyes out. We'll post it soon enough. And again, thank you.